This video is brought to you by PrizePicks. How many games do you think the Browns are going to win this year? That's an interesting question. Another interesting question I would throw alongside with that is, how many games do you think should the Browns win this year? How many games do you think it would be acceptable if the Browns won this year? What are you willing to say you're okay with at this point with the Cleveland Browns? Now, as we know, expectations aren't static. Whatever your expectation is right now, it can rise, it can lower based on how camp goes, how the preseason goes, how the beginning of the season goes, right? There are ways that the Browns could win 6 games this year and people could be pretty happy with it. There are ways that the Browns could win 8 games this year and people could be pretty pissed off about winning those 8 games. Keep this in mind, right? If you're a Cavs fan, we just watched the Cavs go to the Eastern Conference Finals, but the way that they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals pissed people off, even though the goal for a lot of Cavs fans this year was to simply get out the second round, and the Cavs did achieve that goal. Expectations have a way of changing and evolving as time goes on. We kind of act like our expectations that we set are static, right? If I say, I think the Browns should win 7 games right now in May 26 of 2026, and then they win 8 games, I have no right to be mad about that. But how you get to that number does matter and does ultimately change how you feel about whatever accomplishment your team has. That's just the real of it, right? Sometimes you can overachieve so much that a bad result at the end doesn't really matter. Sometimes you can overachieve so much that a bad result at the end really, really matters, right? It all is a matter of context and a matter of circumstance. So if you ask me right now, as of May 26, 2026, I think the Browns can win about 7 to 9 games. That's where I would put it at. I think that they are in that range. Obviously, things can get worse. There can be injuries. Unexpected things could happen. They can get very unlucky, some bad calls, swing a couple of games. That stuff is always in the cards. But more or less, I think this team is capable of winning anywhere between 7 to 9 games. I don't think that's a crazy thing to think. But let's check in with the 33rd team here and see what they feel like the Browns' win-loss record will be. We'll react to this as this clip goes on.
In the AFC North, 6.5 for the Browns. Where are you going on this one? Does that feel high? And before you say, hey, that feels high for the Browns, 4th easiest schedule. They're right there with the Bengals, as we were talking about.
Well, not right there with them, but yes, the 4th easiest. But there is a notable step down from Cincinnati's ease of schedule to Cleveland's ease of schedule. Like they are at the start of the tier where 26 teams, 27 teams, or whatever it is, are effectively all in a bunch.
By the way, all the teams that are listed as having the easiest schedules are teams that play the NFC South.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, if you are
So the first thing to talk about, right, whenever we're talking about easy schedules, the first comment I always see, and it's not a bad comment that people leave, it comes from years of experience, which is an easy schedule based on the numbers from last year, not always guaranteed to come out that way during the season. Now, last year, it was the case that the Browns, before the season, had an easy schedule. And if you look at the collective win percentage of the record that the Browns had, schedule that the Browns had, it was one of the lowest in the NFL. So that math did pan out. These teams were relatively worse than they were actually the year before. So the Browns did have a lighter schedule than most. Other years where you're supposed to have an easy schedule, not really as easy because, there are a lot of teams that made some big moves that didn't really get accounted for in their win-loss record last year that accounted for a huge jump in their win-loss record this year. The first question to ask, instead of just reflexively saying, oh, well, you never know, is to evaluate that, right? Let's analyze that. And when we look at the Browns' schedule, you got to ask yourself the question, who on that schedule do you think will be drastically better than they were last year? We can pull up the opponent. So the Browns play the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were a 13-win team. Do we think they're going to be better than they were last year? I think there is a chance that Jacksonville's probably worse than they were last year. So that's one in the worst bucket, right? Tampa Bay, they're a tricky team. You feel like they should be better than they were last year, but they were really good at a point last year, and then they kind of fizzled out. And that's kind of what Tampa Bay does. They play really good football for a little bit. They fizzle out. They play really good football. Sometimes that gets them enough wins to make the playoffs. Sometimes it doesn't. I think Tampa Bay is going to be relatively the same team that they were. A good team, above 500 team by about 1 or 2 games, but a team that's not going to make a dent in the true contender conversation in the NFC. So I think they're probably the same. The Carolina Panthers, who made the playoffs last year, do we think they're going to be just as good as they were last year? I would bet on the Panthers probably being worse. The Pittsburgh Steelers, do we think they're going to be better or worse than they were last year? Me personally, I don't think they're going to be better than they were last year. I think at best they're going to be just as good as they were last year. I think there is a chance that they could be worse than they were last year. The Jets, do we think they're going to be better or worse than they were last year? I think there's a chance that the Jets are slightly better than they were last year. I don't know if it's going to be a gigantic improvement, but I think it'd be there. Baltimore, are they going to be better or worse than they were last year? Probably, maybe better, but I think about the same. I think Baltimore's probably going to be better win-loss record-wise, which is going to make the strength of schedule change. So not different to beat as far as like who you play on a week-to-week basis, but their record will be better, right? Tennessee, are they going to be better or worse than they were last year? Probably slightly better, but not drastically better. Still a team that's going to be picking in the top 15. Then New Orleans, are they going to be much better than they were last year? They actually have a chance to be much better than they were last year. I think they're kind of flying under the radar. They have some bad things going on their defense, but they did figure out something with that offense late. So I'll throw them in the better category, right? Houston are going to be better or worse than they were last year. They're a wild card. Their offense could pick up, but maybe their defense drops off and they're the same team they were last year. But for the last 3 years, the Texans have been the same team. They've been good enough to win the AFC South, good enough to win a playoff game, not good enough to get past the second round. I think they're probably going to be that same team here. The Raiders, are they going to be better or worse than they were last year? Probably about the same. The Bengals, better or worse than they were last year? Really depends on Joe Burrow's health. We're playing this game late in the season. If Joe Burrow's healthy, they'll be better than they were last year. If Joe Burrow's not healthy, they won't. But Joe Burrow was healthy for both the games last year, I believe, and the Browns were able to win one of those games, so they're probably just as good as they were last year. The Falcons, probably just as good as they were last year. The New York Giants, I think they're probably going to be around the same, maybe slightly better than they were last year. The Colts, I think they're going to be worse than they were last year. So you look at the schedule, and it's not like there's a ton of teams there that are waiting to like trip you up on that win-loss record stuff because they're going to be so much better than they were last year. A lot of these teams, if they're going to improve, it might be, 1 or 2 game improvements, but it's not going to be a massive improvement to what they were last year. So I do think that the Browns are pretty safe, and Browns fans should be pretty safe in assuming that schedule's probably going to be easier than they think, or as easy as, not as easy. I don't want to say the word easy. Easy sends the wrong message. That schedule is going to be more accessible for the Cleveland Browns to get wins in. Easy sends the message that it's easy to win a game in the NFL. I don't care how trash your opponent is, as long as they're an NFL team. Very difficult to win. But winning will be more accessible this year. Based on that schedule. I do think that will hold up, much like it did last year.
NFC teams, the NFC North teams that are playing the NFC South, or the AFC North teams that are playing the NFC South, that's why
it's a weird
schedules are on the easier side, mostly.
It's a weird schedule quirk this year, though, because of teams like the Chiefs mess things up, where like these teams that are expected to be really good this year, again, had really terrible seasons last year.
They're playing a third place.
So theoretically, the teams that had these schedule or had these third or fourth place finishes that are supposed to give you the easier schedule the next year are not going to, because we expect teams to improve a lot.
The schedule, your standing only affects 3 out of the 17 games.
Sure.
Though. It only affects a few. The bigger issue is like the rotating
but that makes a
division.
Difference. Yeah.
Makes a little bit of a difference, sure. But it's like that's what separates you from your division mates, basically.
But like
I think that's a great point too. We make a lot of like the last place schedule thing, right? But it's only 3 of the 17 games. You know, 3 games is important. 3 games can swing a season, right? The difference between a 7-win team and a 10-win team is making the playoffs or not. So not going to act like 3 wins is not significant, right? And it's not guaranteed that you get those 3 wins because you're a last place team too. But the most important thing is your rotation. I think that's why the schedule is so much easier for the Browns. On top of like the AFC North itself, right? We talked about some of the NFC South stuff, right? They've been in that spot for the last 5 years. But the AFC North is kind of slowly morphing into the same thing. The Bengals aren't the world beaters they were 3 years ago. You know, they've lost a lot of punch defensively, offensively. They've gained some, but the health of Joe Burrow has become a bigger question mark than it was in 2022. Then you have the Ravens, who it looks like Lamar has started to slow down. He's still an excellent quarterback, but he started to slow down a little bit from his top pace that he was when he was like a 2-time fresh off MVP in 2024, right? It seemed like last year was a bit of a down step for him in a way that hasn't happened for Lamar in his career. So that's something you have to pay attention to. Also, the Ravens roster, it's just not as win now ready as it was a couple of years ago. They'll be a good team, but you know, they still have those problems that they had last year in the structure of that roster. It'll be a little bit better on the offensive line, but they still have some of those same problems there. Pittsburgh has been stuck in that purgatory, and now they've been using Band-Aids to fix that quarterback position. They've been throwing old quarterbacks at the problem, and eventually that dam's going to bust for Pittsburgh. So the division as a whole is just not as strong as it was, back in 2020 when this was the best division in sports. Now it's at a much weaker place, which I think is the biggest effect on the strength of schedule. The fact that Baltimore is no longer one of the teams in the conversation to be a favorite to win the championship this year. The fact that Pittsburgh hasn't been in that conversation in a while, and the fact that Cincinnati for the last 3 years hasn't even made the playoffs is why the schedule looks like it is, right? And why it tends to be talked about as an easier schedule. And then you play the NFC South on rotation, right? Which makes up a large chunk of your schedule. But I think it's the part that they're missing here is, the NFC South's not as good. The Browns have a last place schedule. But the reason that their schedule's not as tough as it was in previous years is you can't really count on the AFC North to have 3 double-digit win teams like you could 2-3 years ago. And that's the big difference there with the AFC North and with the Browns schedule. And that's going to make the difference for if the Browns schedule is quote-unquote more easy or accessible versus whether it's just as difficult as any other schedule goes, is the health of the AFC North. If the AFC North is back to being what they've been, then the Browns have a problem. We're going to continue on with this video, but first I got to thank my sponsor, PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fun way to earn cash while you watch your favorite teams. No complex betting rules, just pick more or less on a few player stats and lock in your lineup. Here are my picks for this upcoming season, AFC North edition. Jimmy Bernard, I have less than 475. This has to do with volume available in Pittsburgh's offense. Quincy Judkins, I have over 975. Browns improved line. I think the run game is going to be better with it. Chase Brown, under 900 yards. Joe Burrow equals less rushing yards usually for the Bengals offense. Mark Andrews, more than 475 yards. Lamar's going to need a safety blanket. Check to see if PrizePicks is available in your state. You could follow me on the app at Quinn_C to see all my lineups. Download the PrizePicks app today. Play $5 and get $50 in lineup to download the app using the link in the description. The big concern with the Cleveland Browns as far as their ability to maintain their well, not maintain, but get to where they want to win-loss record-wise is the defense. I think that's going to be a huge part of this, right? Can the defense, with a new defensive coordinator in Mike Rudenberg, maintain that same quality of defense that they've had? There are some in Cleveland that think a new defensive coordinator is not just going to be able to maintain what Jim Schwartz was able to do, the relatively simplistic style that Jim Schwartz ran, but might be able to add on top of it and make that even better. It's going to be interesting to see how that turns out, because I could see the defense getting worse. I can also see being more complicated, being more complex in the back end, being something that helps the Cleveland Browns fix some of the problems that they've been exposed to have against some of the better teams that they played. But let's listen to what they think about that.
About that, say, similar personnel.
I think that's a big concern.
But that's my concern.
Jim Schwartz got that defense on track and had them playing at a high level for a few years. And we've said before, that was one of the most extreme defenses in the NFL in terms of consistency of scheme and what they do. Like, we line up in a given way and we basically play this way and we try and out-execute you. Most teams don't do that. Most teams are far more multiple and far more diverse and disguise their coverages and their play a lot more. The Browns and Schwartz basically just lined up. I mean, I'm simplifying it. It's reductive, but they basically went, this is what we do. We're lining up and we're going to be better than you are. And it was an extreme version of that schematically. So number one, that's changing, which was working so well. And number two, they're going to be going to something very different to what they were playing last year. So these are two things that could potentially derail what has been an extremely good defense.
I would argue that he's wrong here. Just because, one, I don't think it's that much of a departure from what they've done. I mean, the defensive linemen have talked to the media and said basically nothing is changing on the front line, right? The defensive line, they're still going to be as aggressive about attacking downfield. They're still going to be the same kind of defense they were in that front seven. What's changing is the back end. They've kept the same linebacker coach in Jason Tarver. They kept the same defensive line coach in Jacques Césaire. Both those guys deserve a ton of credit for the players they've been developing. Jacques Césaire, like, you look at some of the defensive linemen, Alex Wright and Isaiah McGuire, the progress that they've made over the last couple of years. We see what Mason Graham was able to do when he had his run of it, especially after the bye week. Myles Garrett and the work that he's done obviously goes without question. Malik Collins having a career year. Even Shelby Harris having a bit of a renaissance here in Cleveland. Like, Jacques Césaire has done a great job and deserves a strong reputation there. And the Browns have been able to retain those two coaches. They're going to retain a lot of what they did on the front seven. What they're changing is what happened in the back end with that defense, right? They got some safeties, some extra safeties. It looks like they're going to run some more 3 safety looks out there and try to be more complex there, so they're not as reliant on just pure overpowering teams to be able to win in the back end. And I don't see why that is something that should make it much harder for the Browns to repeat their success of the past. Jim Schwartz is a great defensive coordinator. Jim Schwartz did get that defense on track, but let's be honest about the job that Jim Schwartz had and did, right? It was not, I mean, we talked about this while we were talking about what defensive coordinator the Browns should hire in 2022 when we knew that Joe Woods was going to be out of here. I said multiple times on this show, you can go back and watch the videos from 2-3 years ago. It's not going to take a genius to fix this defense. They just have to invest in defensive tackle, and they have to be more aggressive on the front line. And that's what Jim Schwartz did. And it fixed the defense. Not because he figured out something schematically, not because Jim Schwartz is some kind of a mastermind, but because Jim Schwartz was competent enough to just look at the Browns defense and do the obvious thing. And Jim Schwartz does deserve credit for that. He made a fun environment to work. He definitely picked some great coaches, and the Browns have retained those coaches. But I'm not going to sit here and act like this was some kind of 4D chess, Steve Spagnuolo, oh, look what he's doing with nothing, defensive coordinating job by Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz was the guy who saw Myles Garrett and said, maybe just let him rush the passer all the time. None of the other defensive coordinators that Myles Garrett had up to that point just did that, right? So, yes, Jim Schwartz deserves credit for what the Browns did defensively, but let's not act like Jim Schwartz came in here and figured out the theory of relativity, right? Like, he just walked in, saw how the Browns were using Myles Garrett and went, well, they're overthinking it, and really just put in a simple system. So, yeah, and Mike Rutenberg comes from those roots, right? Jim Schwartz came from the Jeff Fisher tree. Mike Rutenberg comes from the same roots here. I think he's off on his read about the changes the Browns have made. Mike Rutenberg is not a departure from what the Browns have done, and the Browns have made it clear that they're not moving away from what they have done defensively with Jim Schwartz.
That everybody puts out for the sort of range of outcome stuff, and I feel like the Browns have at least two quarterbacks that have a really broad range of outcomes. Like this, it's a very sort of short, like low height, but very wide bell curve, right? Where either one of Deshaun Watson or Shedeur Sanders could operate this offense at like a league worst level. Like it could be the worst offense in the NFL with one of those quarterbacks at the helm, right? I also think that both of those guys have a fairly high ceiling. Like I think Deshaun Watson, again, I think him getting back to 100% of what he was at his peak is probably a pipe dream. But 75% of what he was in a Monken offense, if those receivers are pretty good, is probably quite a good player. And also, again, Shedeur Sanders showed enough last year that you're like, if he takes, if he's just getting his feet wet and takes a year to get it and in a Monken offense, he could be a pretty good player. I mean, his aggressiveness down the field, his big playability in that offense, his confidence last year was impressive given what was around him. I think his ceiling is still reasonably high as well. So it's just a very broad range of outcomes where this offense could absolutely stink, or it could be reasonably good with two separate quarterbacks at the helm.
And I don't know why I'm.
So I would say, one, I think the focus for them was too much on the quarterback position. I don't know how broad the range of outcome is going to be for the Cleveland Browns this year, if I'm being honest with you, at quarterback. I tend to think it's a little bit more narrow. I don't think 75% of what Deshaun Watson used to be is on the table anymore. As somebody who has had to watch Deshaun Watson play football for the last 5 years, somebody who's broken down all 19 of his starts multiple times, I tend to think that there's not 75% of what he used to be in him. I think in 2023, the best year he had as a Cleveland Brown, where he was legitimately above average, I think that was about 60% of what he used to be. There was still not the dynamic playmaking that Deshaun had there. There was still a hesitancy to make decisions there in 2023, but he wasn't paralyzed by it like he was in 2024. So, like, if 2023 is the best we've seen Deshaun Watson be in a Browns uniform, and he was about 60% of what he used to be, and during that season, he destroyed his throwing shoulder, and then after that season, he had 2 Achilles tears, I think it's fair to say Deshaun Watson's probably capable of being 50 to 55% of what he used to be, which would be a vast improvement to what he was in 24, where he wasn't any percent of what he used to be, right? So if he goes to 55%, it's going to be a drastically better quarterback than he was in 2024. It's going to be an actually playable, average level NFL quarterback for the Cleveland Browns. It's not going to be anything spectacular, but it'll be functional for the team. So that's why I think the ceiling is on Deshaun. With Shedeur, it's a different conversation because I don't know what the ceiling is for Shedeur in his career. I think Shedeur can be a starting level quarterback at some point in his career, but I do think we're underestimating the amount of work that needs to be done for him to get to that point. There's a lot of retooling that needs to happen for him to be successful at the NFL level. I think he has some of the physical tools to be successful. he's an accurate enough quarterback to be successful, and if he can be more process driven, then I think that there is a way for him to be a functional quarterback in the NFL. The problem is that his current process right now is just not anywhere near where it needs to be as far as discipline and being process oriented. Now, Todd has given him credit for addressing this part of his game, and I hope Shedeur does make great leaps there, because the quicker he fixes that, the sooner he'll be able to play quarterback at a acceptable level for the Cleveland Browns. And if that could be this year, that would be awesome, right? But that work needs to be done. I tend to think that the ceiling for Shedeur, what did I say before the draft, right? I had him around like a Geno Smith, like what Geno Smith was in Seattle, not what he was with the Raiders. But I had him around like a Geno Smith ceiling, right? Like that's kind of where I think he is as a quarterback, an above average starter he could eventually get to. But I do think it's going to take a lot of work for him to get to that point. And it might be a longer journey for Shedeur than people are ready for, right? It might be a 4 or 5. With Geno Smith, it was 10 years, right? It might be one of those kind of journeys, because there's a lot of things that need to be fixed that I don't even know is on the radar for him to be really addressed right now in his game, in my personal opinion. You could take that for whatever you think it's worth. But the focus on quarterback, right? I get it because it's the quarterback position, but really the Browns' bread and butter to fix and improve the offense isn't going to be quarterback play. Let's just assume quarterback play is going to be bad, right? If we assume quarterback's going to be bad, how do you then improve the Browns quarterback room? I mean, not quarterback room, but offense. You improve that offense by fixing the run game, right? That's the thing that will really determine how successful the Cleveland Browns will be from a win-loss standpoint. You can have mediocre quarterback play and win more than 6.5 games. You can have shitty quarterback play and win more than 6.5 games. You can have god-awful quarterback play and win more than 6.5 games. You can make the playoffs with god-awful quarterback play. Mind you, P.J. Walker was an instrumental part of the Cleveland Browns winning 11 games in 2023. And P.J. Walker just retired from the Canadian Football League today. You don't need excellent quarterback play to make the playoffs or to win more than 6.5 games. And I feel like their analysis is more appropriate for talking about the Browns as a contender, but not appropriate for if they can win more than 7 wins. You can win 7 games in the NFL by playing really good defense and having a good run game, and that's going to be what determines it for the Cleveland Browns. And that's why I think the Browns probably win between 7 and 9 games. I'm not very optimistic about the quarterback room right now. I've been pretty open about that. I know people are picking sides because it's a quarterback battle, but I don't think the future is that bright playing Deshaun Watson again. I'm skeptical about if Shedeur Sanders in his second year is ready to be the quarterback that the Browns need him to be in year 2. So I don't have great expectations for either quarterback at this point. I don't think quarterback play is going to be good for this team, but I do still think they can win 7 and 9 games because Quincy Judkins, the run game, the offensive line overhaul, I think that will give them a floor. And I think the thing that you need to look for if you're a Cleveland Browns fan, if you're watching them in the preseason and watching them in the early parts of the season, can they be successful running the ball from different personnel packages? Can they be successful running the ball from different looks? Or do they always have to be heavy, 12P, 13P, to run the ball with success? If the Browns can run the ball with success out of multiple different looks, then they're going to probably be a better team than people think. But that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.